at the Bible study on Tuesday morning online, which we won't have this week. We'll have it next week on the 4th of August. Last week, I jokingly said that we're not going to focus on the lectionary readings that we read on Sunday mornings. This time, I'm just going to take the Bible, and I'm just going to open it up and put my finger down somewhere, and that's where we'll start, and we'll just go from there. I was joking. And somebody immediately said, that can get kind of spooky, you know. And somebody else then followed up and said, my grandma did that once. She opened the Bible up, put her finger down, and it said, and Judas went out and hanged himself. So she closed the book. That wasn't good. So she opened it again and put her finger down, and it said, go and do likewise. And I thought that was hilarious, a little scary. I don't know if Grandma ever did that again. It took me a little while to get myself kind of recovered and ready to be part of something serious. If you were to go to this section of Matthew in the parables and just put your finger down somewhere, you would not find anything really as definite as what Grandma found when she put her finger down in the Bible. The parables are these opaque stories that are intentionally left open for discussion, thought, interpretation, argument even. So, what are we to do with them? What are we to make of them? Or maybe, what have they to do with us, if anything? I think in reading them, it's always good to remind ourselves that Jesus uses these stories to talk about a realm, a reality, a way of being in the world that is different and subversive in terms of the way we generally operate. It's a way that's trying to sneak in, that's trying to infiltrate, that's trying to affect us and the world around us. So Jesus says, well, the kingdom of heaven it's sort of like buckthorn that somebody thought was really a nice shrub, and they planted it in their yard, and the birds love the pretty berries, and they eat the berries, and pretty soon there's buckthorn everywhere crowding out all the native plants because the birds love the pretty berries, and they eat them, and then they fly off and poop them all over the place, and pretty soon it's everywhere. The kingdom of heaven is like that. What? That doesn't sound good. Well, okay, the kingdom of heaven is like this woman who took this flour and she mixed yeast into all the flour. And the flour, you see, was for making matzah for Passover, the flatbread that is unleavened. And so pretty soon, rather than dough for flatbread, you've got this bubbling gallons, 3 gallons of dough just bubbling and oozing all over the place. The kingdom of heaven is like that. So then God is like a ritual-ruining woman? Really? I don't know if I like that. Okay, well, the kingdom of heaven is like this jeweler who was always looking for fine jewels, and she finds this one magnificent stone that she has to have. And so she sells her whole inventory and takes the money and goes and buys that one jewel. Okay? So then she's out of business, right? Because she's got the one, but she's got nothing else. She's got nothing to work with. So what does she do then? The kingdom of heaven is like this net that goes down to the floor of the sea, and it's dragged along, and it gathers up everything in its path, all kinds of fish and crabs and turtles and bottles and old tires and everything. And it's all brought in, all gathered up, of course, to be sorted out later, good and bad, useful, not. You ever feel like an old tire that's been soaking at the bottom of the lake for a while? Jesus tells stories like this, parables like this, and then he winds this up with, and anybody who's ready for this realm that I'm talking about, anybody who's prepared, is like somebody who owns a home, and they bring out their new stuff and their old stuff. They bring it all out, their treasure, their best stuff, new and old. Or, actually, the Greek word says they throw it out. They throw it all out in preparation. in readiness. You know, Jesus, I think you need to work on your stories a little bit because they're weird and they leave a funny taste in my mouth, and you have all these images and they don't necessarily fit. A woman with yeast and a seed and a jewel and a net. I mean, come on. Just focus on maybe one or two and unify it, because if you're going to sell this thing, you really got to bring it together. It just doesn't work. And after all, the realm of God can't be like all of these things. Really, can it? Can it? And there's one that I left out, and that was the one that sort of caught my ear this time, where Jesus says, and the kingdom is like, well, it's like buried treasure. Treasure buried in a plot of ground, and somebody discovers that it's there, and she goes and sells everything that she owns, everything, and comes and buys that plot of ground. Okay? And then what? What does she do then? Does she use the treasure to pay bills? Does she build a lovely lake home so she can get away from the craziness of the cities? Does she share it with her neighbors and her family so she can bring them all up? Does she create some foundation for underprivileged something or other? Does she even dig up the treasure? Because it doesn't say she digs it up. It's just that she buys the land. And what good is treasure that stays buried? Unless she uses it to develop the land. Yeah, she could do like a lottery. She could say, okay, there's all these lots here that I own, and there's treasure buried in one of these lots. And so if you buy the right lot, then not only do you get that lot, but you get part of the treasure that's there. And I'll tell you how much later. And so she could sell off all those lots and make all kinds of money and still keep some of the treasure. Or maybe this story about buried treasure is the beginning of the story of the Holy Land, land that's holy because it's rich with treasure. Or maybe it's the beginning of the story of Richfield, Minnesota. Richfield, get it? Or the beginning of the story of, where do we live? Where is this located? What's this place? Golden Valley. There's gold in that there valley. Treasure buried. Ah, yes. But back to the question. What value is treasure that stays buried? Whether it's buried in the ground or in a community in terms of its resources, or within a relationship, or within a human life. In the past 4 months, 9 convicted murderers have been released from prison in the Washington, D.C. area. They're all in their late 30s or early 40s. They committed their crimes when they were 15, 16, 17 years old. And think about brain research. And guys, these are all men, how well we function at those teenage years and how reasonable and rational we are in what we do. Okay. So these guys are out of prison now. Yes, knock, knock on wood. Out of prison now, having served at least 15 years. And this is all part of the Incarceration Reduction Amendment Act, the IRAA. It's been going on in the D.C. area since 2016, but they stepped it up now because of COVID. They're trying to bring down the prison and jail population to keep the virus from spreading through all these prisoners. So those who are ready to be released, they're stepping up the pace to get them out into the world. But coming out now into this world, having been locked away for at least 15 years, imagine what that's like. It's hard enough functioning in this world when you've been in it. And it's changed over those 15 years so much, and now in these last months, tremendously. So these guys coming out of prison and out of that structure, trying to find work, which they have to have, trying to find a place to live, which they have to have, and trying to find a community of people who want to have anything to do with them, given our level of trust of one another right now, how hard is that? Well, in 1991, Eddie Ellis was convicted of shooting and killing another teenager. Eddie was 16 at the time, and he was sentenced to 22 years in prison. He served 15 years, and in 2006 he got out of prison, so he's 31 years old, having been out of the world for 15 years, having left the world at about the time you get your driver's license. So he knows very well how hard it is to start your life at that age, having missed so much and having come back to a world that is not the world you know. And he's watched guys struggle for the 14 years, almost 15 years he's been out now. So now he works for a thing called the Campaign for Fair Sentencing of Youth, and in conjunction with the Free Minds Book Club. And they have come together and are funding a program to try to help these guys who are coming out of prison, to help them find their way. Now, they do a variety of things, but one of the core things, a central thing, is an online gathering that happens every Thursday evening at 6:30 for about 90 minutes. And Eddie is the host, Eddie Ellis. And he says it's like an online local barber shop for these guys. So you can imagine. They can gather in this virtual same space, and they can interact, and they can chatter, and they can tell stories, and they can laugh, and they can trash talk each other's sports teams or whatever it is that you do in the barber shop. And then, when they are ready, they can talk about the deeper stuff. He said, we wanted to create a place that was safe, where these guys could relax and be themselves and talk about whatever they needed to talk about, the struggles they're having, the frustrations, the walls they're running into, trying to get their lives going, the pain that they feel, the loss, because maybe their families don't want to associate with them, the regret over all of the years that they've lost, the grief, all of that stuff. They can talk about all of that. And he said, there is no judgment here. We do not allow that. You talk, we listen, and it stays here. They also do letter writing campaigns on behalf of other inmates. They do video testimonials that they record and send to the judges who are handling cases of others in prison who are seeking release. They encourage each other. They share practical information. I heard about, this place is hiring. Maybe you want to check them out. What do you want to do? All kinds of things that one might know or others might know that you might not. They help each other out. They lift each other up. At the beginning of a recent meeting, one guy comes on and he says, "Hey man, what's up?" And one guy responds just very quietly, "Just blessed, man. I'm just blessed." And another guy calls out, "I got a call back from FedEx. That's what's up, man." And they all cheer because that's a possibility. That's an opening for these guys who have been so locked in and locked down. Charles Fauntleroy comes to this online barbershop. He went to prison at age 17 for murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. He said, "I knew when I went in that I was going to die there as a 17-year-old. Now he's out after 22 years. He's 41, and he runs in a park every day near where he lives. He says, it's to keep in shape, it's to burn up energy. He says, it's just because it feels so good to be outside. It just does so much good for me to be outside after 22 years. Derek Evans is another one. He was released in April. He'd been behind bars for 24 years. He says, I'm just trying to gain some insight on on how to be a free human being in this world. It's been so long, I don't know how to do it. And I'm looking for work. But do you know how hard it is to find work if you don't have an ID? And do you know how hard it is to get an ID in COVID time? And so they talk about that, and they help him out. The meeting goes about 90 minutes. At the end of it, Eddie, who is the host, thanks them all for coming and simply signs off saying, "See you next week, brothers." And there are other brothers who pop in when they can. And there are other brothers who are locked away in prison who have heard about this program in the D.C. area and who now are changing their behavior in prison and changing within themselves because now they have some hope that they might get out. The kingdom of heaven, Jesus says, is like a priceless pearl. It's like a net that gathers up everything. It's like this woman mixing yeast into the flour. It's like this seed working underground, unknown, unseen. Is it not also like a gathering of thrown away men, buried in prison, now set free, becoming community with and for each other, discovering and encouraging the treasure that each of them is and bears, challenging the judgment on them that they don't belong in the world, that they're not worth being out, changing the narrative so that others who have been locked away since they were virtually children now have hope and find themselves being changed because of that. Isn't the kingdom of heaven like that? And aren't there more stories, more parables to hear, to see, to be told, to be heard? Because it's everywhere. The realm of God, the kingdom of heaven is everywhere. So what's it like for you? What does it look like? What does it sound like for you? What parable would you tell? And would others look at your life and at my life and at the life of this congregation and say, them. It's just like them. It's just like